At 1423, on September 19, 1944, near St. Lo in France, Corporal Thomas Bennett crouched behind his 3-inch anti-tank gun, the Model M5, in a hedgerow cut high above a field. 5 German Panther tanks moved across the open ground 800 yards away, low in a shallow dip. The gun crew had held this position for 6 hours. They had watched the Panthers feel their way forward all morning, pausing, turning, testing the ground with caution. Now they were closing, and the time to shoot had come. Bennett's hands shook, then steadied. He knew the textbook method. He also knew the textbook method could get them all killed. The 3-inch gun was a good weapon, accurate, powerful. On a calm range, it could punch through 3 inches of armor at 1,000 yards if the shot was flat and true. Every manual taught the same limits. Depress the barrel to 5 degrees below level at most. Raise it no higher than 15 degrees above level. Those angles kept the recoil smooth, kept the steel within its design, kept the mount and springs safe. Stay within those limits, said the book, and the gun will live to fire again. The ground did not care about the book. Bennett's gun sat in a hedge bank roughly 12 feet above the field. The Panthers were rolling forward through a shallow hollow that dropped another 8 feet under the level of the surrounding farms. If Bennett followed the manual, he would have to wait until the Panthers climbed out of that dip and into flatter ground, perhaps 300 yards from his muzzle. At that distance, the German crews would see his flash, mark his hedge, and send a 75mm shell back before he could fire twice. The front of the Panther was 80 millimeters thick and sloped steeply. From the front, at close range, it was a coin toss, even for a perfect shot. And a coin toss was not good enough. Second Lieutenant James Walsh, 24 years old, 8 weeks in France, stood behind Bennett and told him to wait. Wait for the approved angle. Wait for the Panthers to climb. Wait for the clean frontal shot the diagrams showed. Walsh was not wrong. He was following the only guidance he had. But Bennett had 11 months as a gunner behind him. He had fought in North Africa and in France. He had fired at German armor 23 times and had hit 17. He also had never tried what he was thinking now. He had never lifted the barrel past the safe limit. He had never risked breaking his own gun to save his own crew. He had spent the long morning doing quiet math in his head. He measured with his eyes, counted with his breath, traced arcs that only he could see. The Panthers would remain below his line of sight for several more minutes. When they climbed, they would be too close. There was one way to reach them now. He would raise the barrel to roughly 32 degrees. He would send the solid armor-piercing shot up and out on a high arc and let gravity pull it down onto the thin roofs of the Panthers. The top armor was 40 millimeters above the engine and only about 25 millimeters on the turret roof. A 3-inch solid shot falling steeply would go through like a hammer through wood. There was a price. At that angle, the recoil would be savage. The springs could compress beyond their safe travel. The trunnions could scream. The mount could crack. The traverse gear could shear teeth. The gun might survive 1 shot. It might survive 3 shots. It would not survive forever. And if it failed on the second try with 5 Panthers closing, the gun crew would be left with nothing but a ruined weapon and a prayer. Bennett looked to his loader, Private Rodriguez, a 20-year-old from Texas with quick hands and wide eyes. Rodriguez had been with the crew for 2 months. He loaded fast and never asked questions at the wrong time. He was scared, like everyone, but he did not freeze. Bennett nodded once. He raised the barrel until the elevation scale passed the last safe mark. Lieutenant Walsh told him to lower it. Walsh's voice shook because he understood both dangers, the danger of the enemy and the danger of the gun. Bennett kept the barrel high. The Panthers rolled on. German optics were sharp. German gunners trained well. German doctrine deadly. The Panthers expected to fight on a flat plane against flat shots. Their armor, especially that sloped glacis, was designed for that. They had learned to win that fight. Fire came at them level, and they were ready for it. They were not looking for a shot that would fall from above. Bennett exhaled, long and even. He felt the metal of the hand wheel bite his palm. He pressed the trigger. A normal shot from the 3-inch gun pushed back like a hard shove. This one bucked like a living thing. The mount boomed against its stops. The springs groaned. The whole weapon came up and down with a metallic cry that made the crew flinch. The muzzle flash washed bright white against the green hedge. The shot went up into the gray September sky and for a moment disappeared. Bennett counted 1 and 2 and 3. The lead Panther kept rolling, blind to the threat. 4 and 5 and 6. He had done the math, but the sky does not always accept your numbers. 7 and 8. The shell came down. It struck the engine deck almost vertically. 40 millimeters of top plate was nothing at that angle with that energy. The shot punched through the armor, tore into the compartment, ripped lines and metal, and fire blew out of the vents. The Panther stopped hard. The crew inside did not move. The next 4 Panthers braked at once. Their commanders stood higher in their hatches and tried to read the field. They looked for muzzle flashes and hedgerows at eye level. They looked along lanes, ditches, windows. An anti-tank gun could not throw a shell down onto a tank. That is what they had been taught. That is what their eyes wanted to believe. Rodriguez was already moving. He shoved a second solid shot into the open breach. The block slid shut. Bennett held the barrel where it was. The gun smelled like hot oil and metal. He fired again. The second recoil felt worse and better at once. Worse for the shutter. Better because the mount still held. He counted. The second shot came down on the turret roof of the second Panther, a place of thin steel and vital people. The round went through the flat plate and into the crew space. Black smoke poured out of the hatch. The tank stopped cold. The last 3 Panthers started reversing, thick machines inching backward, trying to back out of the dip to safer ground. Panthers were fast enough on roads, but in reverse, in a depression, with fear in the cabin, they were clumsy. Bennett had time for 1 more, maybe 2. Rodriguez fed the 3rd round. Bennett led the center tank a fraction for the slow backward motion and pressed the trigger. The 3rd shot dropped onto the joint where turret meets hull, the turret ring, the known weakness of any tank. The ring jammed. The turret locked. The crew bailed and ran for a hedgerow. The remaining 2 Panthers crested the far lip and disappeared behind a low ridge. 90 seconds had passed. 3 Panthers were dead or crippled. Not a single German shell had come back. The gun still stood, though its spring sounded old in a new way. Walsh stared, and then finally found his voice and asked how Bennett had known. Bennett told the truth. He had not known. He had calculated, and he had guessed, and he had hoped. Only the first hit made the guess into something real. What none of them understood yet was that 6 other American gun crews had watched the arc of those shots from other positions and were already talking about what they had seen. They would pass on an idea in plain words, in dirt diagrams, in quick whispers, geometry, gravity, and the blind spot in German doctrine. The Panther was built for a level duel. Its strongest plates faced forward. Its slope deflected level shots. Its sides were still tough. Its crew believed in that steel. But the top was thin, because the top was never meant to take solid shot from above. The Panther's roof could shatter under a steep hit, and the high arc gave you that steep hit. Gravity helped. A fired shell rises to a peak and falls. That fall gives back speed that air has taken. The difference between a flat strike and a falling strike is the angle on the armor, and angle is everything. Flat roof. Falling shot, no deflection, no mercy. Bennett and Walsh checked the gun. The left recoil spring had compressed almost to its limit. The mount was warm to the touch. The barrel might have taken a small bend, a whisper of a change that would demand a careful recalibration by the ordnance men. Walsh wrote notes that named the range, the time, the targets. He did not write the elevation. He did not write 32 degrees. Bennett asked him why. Walsh said because it worked, and because the crew was alive, and because some things could be explained later, if later came. Within the hour, 3 crews arrived one after another, men from the same battalion who had seen fire fall from the sky, and wanted to do it too. Bennett showed them the handwheel position he had used. He explained that 7 to 9 seconds of time of flight meant roughly 700 to 900 yards at that angle. He told them to aim a touch forward on a moving tank in reverse. He warned them that the gun might not forgive them. Every man nodded. Every man said he accepted the cost. They had used the manual method for 2 months, and too many friends were dead. The idea spread like water through grass. No orders, no memos, just gunners teaching gunners. By September 22nd, 9 guns in the battalion were lifting barrels past safe lines when the ground and the moment fit. Staff Sergeant William Parker, 2 miles east, tried it at 30 degrees on a group of 4 Panthers near a small French village. He hit the first on the turret roof. He hit a second as it tried to turn. The 4th escaped. His mount survived all 4 shots, though the springs moaned like old doors for the rest of the week. That night he drew simple triangles and arcs in the dirt behind the maintenance area and taught 5 more crews. They did it out of earshot of officers who might tell them to stop. The results showed in the cruelest numbers. In August, the battalion had lost 7 guns to Panthers. In September, they lost 2. In several fights, the Americans killed Panthers at better than 2 to 1. Division headquarters noticed the better ratio, praised training and positioning, and did not know why the line had shifted. The gunners did not tell them. They wrote extended range in reports and left it there. The method had limits. You needed height. If the enemy sat above you, the arc could not help you. The first shots were always the hardest because you couldn't see the strike until it struck. The recoil stress built up. Bennett's gun lasted 18 such shots before the left spring finally broke. Parker's lasted 22. A third gun failed after 7. Replacing springs took the better part of a day if you had spares, longer if you did not. Even so, crews kept using the arc when the ground gave them a chance, because the choice was simple: risk the gun or risk the crew. German reports began to mention something they called plunging fire. At first they blamed artillery. Then they admitted the hits were too precise and too repeated to be random. Intelligence officers asked whether the Americans had brought some new howitzer into the line. Reconnaissance said no. The same 3-inch guns stood in the same hedgerows, only the way they were used was different. German battalion leaders adjusted. They warned their companies to avoid low ground where American guns could shoot down. They tried to rush American positions to close the distance before a gunner could fire 2 or 3 arcs. Sometimes that worked. Sometimes one falling round ended the charge before it began. A few commanders welded spare track links to engine decks and turret roofs. The weight strained engines and did little to stop a 3-inch shot that fell hard and true. It comforted the crews more than it saved them. The worst change for the Germans was in their minds. The Panthers had felt safe from the front. Now they looked up, and fear lived there too. By mid-October, German after-action notes said they had lost several dozen Panthers to steep direct fire in September and October. That was a small share of total losses, but it was enough to bend plans and slow movements. You cannot attack strongly if you must always ask whether the high ground on your flank hides a gun that aims like a mortar and strikes like a ram. In November, an American artillery observer wrote a careful report about guns firing at impossible angles. The Ordnance Department did the math, worried about stress and damage, and issued a bulletin in December that recommended not firing above 20 degrees. It did not order anyone to stop. A recommendation is a door left ajar. The crews read the line and understood what it meant. Keep yourself alive. Use judgment. We will not put you on trial for saving your own men. Thomas Bennett died in 2009 at the age of 87. He was buried in the National Cemetery in Ohio. The museum piece that matches his gun sits at Fort Sill, clean and static, with a placard that lists its weight and its range and the angles the book approved. The small sign does not say that sometimes the safest angle is the one the book warns you never to try. It does not say that lives hang on judgment in the space between danger and doctrine. But the crews who learned from Bennett remember it. They remember the hiss of the vent, the bite of the handwheel, the jump of the mount, and the 8 long seconds you count in your chest while a round climbs into a quiet sky and begins to fall. They remember that the Panther could be beaten, not by numbers, but by a new line drawn in the air, and by the courage to draw it.